The table saw screamed through 8/4-inch walnut, sending a fine mist of sawdust into the cold air of the workshop. Jackson Chen guided the wood with steady hands, his fingers staying precisely 3 inches from the spinning blade, the way his drill instructor had taught him to respect a loaded weapon. Never too close, never careless. The wood separated clean, no tear out, no mistakes. He killed the saw and silence rushed back into the space. The sudden quiet made his ears ring. Or maybe that was the tinnitus, another gift from Fallujah that kept giving, year after year. 15 years since Iraq, and his body still remembered every explosion, every firefight, every moment when staying still meant staying alive. The workshop was a converted garage in East Oakland, 1,200 square feet of order in a neighborhood where order was hard to find. Jack had built everything himself. The workbenches perfectly level, the tool wall, every socket and chisel in its place. The dust collection system, quiet and efficient. This was his kingdom, the only place where he had complete control. He ran his palm across the walnut, feeling for imperfections. The grain was tight, beautiful. This would make a good tabletop for the client in Piedmont who was paying $2,000 for something her husband could have bought at IKEA for $300. But she wanted handmade, wanted the story of craftsmanship, wanted to tell her friends about the veteran who built her furniture. Jack needed the money more than he needed pride. His phone buzzed against the workbench. The screen showed a number he recognized, East Bay Collections. Third time this week. He let it go to voicemail, knowing exactly what they would say. $35,000 in medical debt. Sophie's ACL surgery last year after she tore her knee playing soccer. The insurance had covered some of it, but some was not enough, never enough. The phone buzzed again immediately. Different number this time. Same collection agency, different line. They were getting aggressive. Jack picked up. A woman's voice, professionally pleasant with an undertone of steel. "Mr. Chen, this is East Bay Collections regarding account number 4782. We need to discuss your payment plan." "I'm working on it." "Mr. Chen, you've missed 3 payments. We need $500 by Friday or we'll have to pursue other options." Other options meant lawsuits, wage garnishment, destroying what little credit he had left. Jack looked at the walnut table, doing the math in his head. The client owed him $1,800 after materials. The bank account held $243. Rent was due in 6 days, $1,300 for the cramped 2-bedroom apartment where he and Sophie lived, where the hot water only worked half the time and the neighbors fought loud enough to shake the walls. "I'll have it Friday," he said, and ended the call before she could push harder. He would have it Friday. He would skip his own meals if he had to. Sophie was 14 now, growing fast, eating like she had a hollow leg. She needed new cleats for soccer, new jeans because she had grown 2 inches since September. She needed a father who could provide, not a 42-year-old man working out of a garage, building furniture for rich people who would never know what it felt like to choose between food and electricity. The workshop door opened and Sophie walked in, still wearing her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder. She had her mother's face, delicate features that belonged to a different family, a different life. But she had Jack's eyes, dark and careful, always watching, always thinking. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo, how was school?" She shrugged, the universal teenage signal for not wanting to talk about it. But Jack had learned to read the small signs. The way she held her shoulders, slightly hunched. The way she did not quite meet his eyes. Something had happened. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "Zoff." She dropped her backpack on the floor and sat on the stool by the workbench, the one she had claimed as hers when she was 8 years old and started spending afternoons here while Jack worked. For a long moment she just sat there, picking at a callus on her palm from soccer practice. Coach says I need to pay the uniform deposit by Monday. It's $200. Jack's chest tightened. $200 might as well be $2 million. They're doing new jerseys this year, Sophie continued, her voice carefully neutral, trying not to sound like she cared, trying not to put pressure on him. But it's okay if I can't play. I mean, I could focus more on homework anyway. She was lying. Soccer was everything to her. The one thing she was good at, the one place where being the daughter of a broke single father did not matter because on the field she was fast, she was fierce, she was unstoppable. You'll play, Jack said. I'll get you the deposit. Dad, you don't have to. You'll play. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that hurt worse than any debt collector. Pity. His 14-year-old daughter felt sorry for him. I should start my homework, she said, and left before he could say anything else. Jack stood alone in his workshop, surrounded by tools he had collected over 20 years, in a business that barely kept them fed, in a life that felt like it was built on sand. He thought about the Marines, about the clarity of having a mission, having a purpose, having brothers who would die for you and knowing you would do the same. He thought about coming home and finding out that civilian life did not have room for men who were good at following orders and staying calm under fire, but not much else. His phone buzzed again, different number. He almost ignored it, then saw the name. Harrison Webb, attorney at law. Jack's grandmother had died 3 weeks ago. Margaret Chen, 85 years old, matriarch of a family that had spread across the Bay Area like roots from an old tree. The funeral had been massive, hundreds of people from Chinatown and beyond, all paying respects to a woman who had built a restaurant empire from nothing and ruled it like a quiet queen. Jack had barely known her. His father had died when Jack was 12, drunk driver on Highway 101. After that, the family had fractured, everyone going their own way, tied together by blood but not much else. He saw Margaret maybe once a year at obligatory gatherings, stilted conversations where she would ask about his life, and he would give brief answers, both of them aware they were strangers wearing the masks of family. He answered the phone. Mr. Chen, this is Harrison Webb. I'm handling your grandmother's estate. The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Can you make it? Jack thought about the walnut table, about the deadline, about the deposit Sophie needed. But you did not skip your grandmother's will reading. That was not how things worked. I'll be there. Good. The address is 580 California Street, 42nd floor. Please bring identification. Webb hung up without saying goodbye, the way lawyers did, always in a hurry, always thinking about the next call, the next client, the next billable hour. Jack looked around his workshop. Tomorrow he would put on the one decent suit he owned, the one he had bought at a thrift store for his divorce proceedings 3 years ago, and he would sit in a conference room with his half-brother and half-sister and listen to lawyers talk about money he would never see. Margaret had been wealthy. Everyone knew that. The house alone was worth millions, prime real estate in Russian Hill with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. There would be stocks, bank accounts, all the accumulated wealth of 40 years running high-end restaurants. But Jack knew where he stood in the family hierarchy. At the bottom, Richard, his older half-brother, was the golden child, CEO of a real estate company, always wearing expensive suits, always talking about his latest development deal. Vanessa, his younger half-sister, worked at some hedge fund, pulling down 6 figures, carrying purses that cost more than Jack made in a month. And then there was Jack, the craftsman, the veteran, the one who had not made it, who lived on the wrong side of the bay, who showed up to family gatherings in jeans and work boots because he did not own anything better. Margaret would leave him something, Probably a token amount, 5 or 10,000, enough to say she had not forgotten him but not enough to matter. Richard and Vanessa would get the real money, the house, the investments, everything that actually counted. Jack could already hear Richard's voice, that particular tone of condescension wrapped in false sympathy. At least you got something right. Better than nothing. He shut off the lights in the workshop and went inside the apartment. Sophie was at the kitchen table, math homework spread out in front of her, pencil moving in precise lines. She had his discipline, his focus. She would make something of herself, would go to college, would have the life he had never quite managed to build. That night Jack lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the building. The couple upstairs fighting, their voices muffled but intense. The bass from someone's stereo thudding through the walls. The distant wail of sirens, constant in this neighborhood, the soundtrack of East Oakland after dark. He thought about Margaret, about the handful of memories he had from childhood. Her teaching him to identify different types of wood by grain and weight. Her explaining that real craftsmanship meant patience, meant doing things right even when no one was watching. Her saying something he had never forgotten. Jackson, in this family, most people confuse price with value. You're different. You understand the difference. He had been 8 years old and had not understood what she meant. Now, at 42, broke and tired and alone, he still was not sure. The next morning Jack dropped Sophie at school and drove into San Francisco, crossing the Bay Bridge in his 15-year-old Honda with the check engine light that had been on for 6 months. The city rose up in front of him, steel and glass towers reaching toward a sky that was already forgetting the fog. This was not his world. He belonged in Oakland in his workshop, with his hands on wood and tools he understood. He found parking 3 blocks from the office building and fed the meter with quarters, calculating how long the meeting would take, trying not to spend more than necessary. The building lobby was all marble and mirrors, the kind of place where the security guard looked at you different if you were not wearing a suit that cost a month's rent. Jack took the elevator to the 42nd floor, watching the numbers climb, feeling the altitude in his ears. The doors opened onto a reception area that screamed money, original art on the walls, furniture that was not from IKEA, a receptionist who smiled with perfect teeth and directed him to conference room B. Richard was already there, sitting at the head of a long mahogany table. He wore a charcoal suit with subtle pinstripes, a white shirt so crisp it could cut, a silk tie in a Windsor knot. His watch was a Patek Philippe, $30,000 on his wrist, casual as a wedding ring. 2 men stood behind him, broad-shouldered in dark suits, the kind of muscle that rich people hired when they wanted to feel important. Richard looked up when Jack entered and something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, something in between. "Still doing the carpenter thing?" Richard asked. "Still doing the bloodsucker thing," Jack replied, keeping his voice level. Richard laughed, a short bark with no humor in it. "Cute, have a seat." Jack took a chair on the opposite side of the table, as far from Richard as the room allowed. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later, a swirl of Chanel perfume and designer clothes, her Hermes bag probably worth more than Jack's car. She looked tired beneath the makeup, her eyes red-rimmed like she had been crying or not sleeping, maybe both. She nodded at Jack, a small acknowledgement, then took a seat between them, neutral territory. The door opened again and an older man entered, late 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, expensive suit worn with the comfort of someone who had been wearing expensive suits for 40 years. "Good afternoon. I'm Harrison Webb, executor of Margaret Chen's estate. Thank you all for coming." He sat down and opened a leather folder, pulling out documents with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Death was just another transaction, another set of papers to file, another estate to divide and dispense. Before we begin, I need to verify identities. They each produced driver's licenses. Webb checked them against a list, nodded, and put the licenses back. The formalities complete, he looked up, his face settling into the neutral expression of someone about to deliver news that would make some people happy and others angry. Margaret Chen passed on November 3rd of this year. She was 85 years old. Her estate has been valued at approximately $18.5 million, consisting of real property, investment accounts, life insurance, and various personal assets. 18.5 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. Jack had known Margaret was wealthy, but hearing the actual figure made it real in a way that abstract knowledge never could. Webb continued, reading from the will in that particular lawyer cadence, each word carefully enunciated, leaving no room for misinterpretation. To my grandson Richard Chen, I leave $6 million in cash and securities, as well as authority to manage the sale of my primary residence and rental properties. Richard's face did not change, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. 6 million, plus whatever the house sold for, probably another 4 or 5 million once it was divided. Jack did the math automatically. Richard was walking away with at least 8 million, maybe more. To my granddaughter Vanessa Chen, I leave $5 million in cash and securities, as well as my collection of antique porcelain, valued at approximately $800,000. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Relief, Jack thought, or maybe something else. She had been fidgeting with her phone since she sat down, checking it compulsively, her leg bouncing under the table. Whatever was going on in her life, $5 million would help. Webb turned a page, and Jack braced himself for the token amount, the obligatory gesture, the $5,000 and a pat on the head. To my grandson Jackson Chen, I leave the jade tiger cabinet from my study, as well as $500,000 in cash. The room went silent. Jack's brain stuttered over the number. 500,000, $500,000. That was not a token. That was real money, life-changing money, debt-erasing money. Richard leaned forward. The cabinet, that old piece of furniture. Webb nodded. Yes, the rosewood cabinet from Mrs. Chen's study. It has been appraised at approximately $180,000 to $250,000, depending on market conditions. She's giving him a piece of furniture. Richard's voice had an edge now, the first crack in his polished exterior. What the hell is he going to do with a cabinet that big? He lives in an apartment. The will is quite specific, Webb said calmly. The jade tiger cabinet and all contents therein belong to Jackson Chen and are not subject to division. All contents therein. Odd phrasing. Jack thought about the cabinet, remembered seeing it in Margaret's study years ago. It was massive, 8 or 9 feet tall, intricately carved with scenes of tigers hunting in a forest. He had admired the craftsmanship, the way the wood had been joined without nails, the precision of the carving. But it was just a piece of furniture. Beautiful, yes, but ultimately just wood and artistry. And to Dylan Carter, Webb continued, I leave $2 million in cash, as well as the 1965 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud. Dylan, Jack had barely noticed him sitting in the corner, a thin man with hollow eyes and a suit that hung on him like he had borrowed it from someone bigger. Dylan was supposedly some kind of cousin, the son of a relative no one talked about much. He had shown up at the funeral looking half dead, shaking slightly, the telltale signs of someone deep in addiction. Now Dylan met Jack's eyes across the room and something passed between them. Not quite recognition, more like acknowledgement. Two men at the bottom of the family looking up at the golden children. Webb laid out the timeline. They had 60 days to claim their inheritances. The house would be put on the market immediately, with Richard handling the sale. Personal effects not specifically bequeathed would be auctioned, with proceeds going to charity. The jade tiger cabinet is currently in Mrs. Chen's study, Webb said, looking at Jack. You'll need to arrange transportation. It weighs approximately 700 pounds and will require professional movers. 700 pounds. Jack thought about the stairs in his apartment building, the narrow hallways, the impossibility of getting something that massive into his cramped living room. But the will said it was his. Margaret had chosen to give it to him specifically, and Margaret never did anything without purpose. Richard stood up, buttoning his suit jacket in a sharp, angry motion. This is bullshit. She leaves him $500,000 and a piece of furniture, and I get the responsibility of selling her house. I get to deal with repairs, inspectors, real estate agents, all the headaches. You also get authority over the sale price and terms, Webb said mildly. And the house is worth approximately $4.8 million. Your share of that sale, after expenses, will be substantial. It's not about the money, Richard said, which was a lie so transparent Jack almost laughed. It's about respect. I was the one who visited her every month. I was the one who made sure she had everything she needed. And she gives the same amount to a junkie and a carpenter as she gives to me. He looked at Jack when he said carpenter, loading the word with contempt. Jack had heard that tone before, from officers who thought enlisted men were interchangeable parts, from clients who thought craftsmen were servants, from his ex-wife who had explained, very patiently, that she needed more than a man who worked with his hands. Jack stood up slowly, using his full height, the posture he had learned in the Marines when you needed to establish that you were not prey. I didn't ask for any of this, Richard. If you've got a problem with grandmother's decisions, take it up with her. Oh wait, you can't, she's dead. Richard's face flushed. One of his bodyguards shifted weight, hand moving toward his jacket. Jack marked it, calculated angles and distances, old training rising up automatic as breathing. 2 opponents, close quarters, both probably armed. He could take the closer one first, use him as a shield, but the second one would get a shot off. Acceptable risk if necessary. But Vanessa stood up, putting herself between them, her voice sharp. Stop it, both of you. Grandmother just died and you're already fighting over money like children. She was right. Jack took a breath, forced himself to step back. This was not Fallujah. This was a conference room in San Francisco. Richard was not the enemy. He was just an asshole. I'm leaving, Jack said. He looked at Webb. Email me the paperwork for the inheritance. I'll figure out how to move the cabinet. He walked out without looking back, ignoring Richard's voice behind him, something about responsibility and family obligations. The elevator ride down felt like decompression, pressure releasing, the fake civility of the conference room falling away with each floor. Outside the building, Jack stood on the sidewalk and let himself feel it. $500,000, enough to pay off the medical debt, enough to get Sophie what she needed, enough to stop living hand to mouth, check to check, crisis to crisis. But there was something else, something that nagged at him. The cabinet. Margaret had specified it so carefully. The jade tiger cabinet and all contents therein. She had been deliberate, precise. She had wanted him to have that specific piece, not just for its value, but for a reason he did not yet understand. His phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. He almost did not answer, then decided what the hell. Mr. Chen, an older voice accented formal. This is Vincent Zhang. I was Mrs. Chen's house manager. Jack remembered him vaguely from the funeral. An elderly man in an old-fashioned black suit, standing apart from the crowd, watching everything with sharp eyes. I'm calling because Mrs. Chen left specific instructions regarding the cabinet. She wanted me to ensure you understood something important. What's that? Not over the phone. Can you meet me? Today, if possible, it's urgent. There was something in his voice, a weight that made Jack's instincts perk up. This was not a social call. Where? There's a cafe in Chinatown. Red Blossom Tea Company on Grant Street. I'll be there in 1 hour. Vincent hung up before Jack could ask more questions. Jack stood on the sidewalk, watching the city move around him, businessmen and tourists and hustlers, everyone playing their role in the great machine. He thought about going home, picking up Sophie, forgetting all of this. But Margaret had left him $500,000 and a 700-pound cabinet, and now her house manager was calling with urgent messages. You did not ignore things like that. Jack found parking in Chinatown, fed the meter, and walked through streets that smelled like roasted duck and incense. Red Blossom Tea Company was tucked between a souvenir shop and a pharmacy, its window filled with clay teapots and wooden canisters. Inside, Vincent Zhang sat at a corner table, a pot of tea and 2 cups already waiting. He stood when Jack entered, offered a slight bow, then sat down and poured tea with the careful precision of ceremony. Jack sat across from him, studying the older man. Late 60s, maybe 70, but fit, straight-backed, his hands steady. Military bearing, Jack thought, or something close to it. Thank you for coming, Mr. Chen. Call me Jack. Vincent nodded. Jack, I worked for Mrs. Chen for 40 years. I knew her better than anyone in your family. It was a statement of fact, not a boast. Jack believed him. She left me a letter to give you, but only after you had attended the will reading. Vincent pulled an envelope from his jacket, cream-colored paper, Jack's name written on it in elegant script. She was very specific. You were to receive this only after you knew about the cabinet. Jack took the envelope but did not open it. Why all the secrecy? Because your grandmother understood something about your family that most of them never realized. She understood who could be trusted and who could not. You're talking about Richard. Among others. Vincent's face remained neutral, but his eyes were hard. Richard visited Mrs. Chen 6 months before she died. I overheard part of their conversation. He was asking about assets, about what she had, where things were kept. She told him nothing, but after he left, she called me into her study. She said, Vincent, I need to change my will. Richard has become dangerous. Dangerous, the word sat heavy between them. What did she mean? I don't know, she wouldn't say, but she spent the next month revising everything, working with Mr. Webb, making sure certain things went to certain people. Vincent looked at the envelope in Jack's hands. That cabinet was her most prized possession, not the most expensive but the most meaningful, and she wanted you to have it. Only you. Jack opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once, Margaret's handwriting, shaky but clear. It read, The tiger protects its treasure, so must you. Trust no one. Below that, just her initials. M.L. Margaret Lynn, her maiden name, the name she had used before she married Jack's grandfather, before she became part of the Chen family, before she built her empire and watched it fracture. What does this mean? Jack asked. I was hoping you could tell me. Mrs. Chen did not confide everything even to me, but I know this. 2 weeks before she died, she had the cabinet moved from her bedroom to her study. She spent hours with it alone, and she told me that someone in the family was looking for something, something valuable, something they would kill for if necessary. Kill, the word hung in the air like a threat. Jack thought about Richard, about the bodyguards, about the anger in the conference room. He thought about Vanessa's nervous energy, her constant phone checking, the fear in her eyes. He thought about Dylan, hollow and shaking, a man on the edge. You think someone's in danger. I think you are, Vincent said simply. Mrs. Chen gave you that cabinet for a reason, and whatever that reason is, it's valuable enough that she felt you needed a warning. He stood up, leaving money on the table for the tea. Be careful, Jack. Move the cabinet quickly and keep it safe. And read the letter again. Your grandmother chose every word with purpose. Vincent walked out, leaving Jack alone with a cup of cooling tea and a piece of paper that felt like it weighed more than it should. He read the note again. The tiger protects its treasure. Trust no one. Outside, the afternoon sun slanted through Chinatown's narrow streets, casting long shadows that looked like fingers reaching. Jack folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket, next to his heart, where he had once carried a picture of Sophie when she was a baby, back when he was in Fallujah, and that photo was the only thing that made him believe he might actually make it home. He thought about the cabinet waiting in Margaret's study, 700 pounds of carved rosewood hiding something important enough to warrant warnings and secrets. Tomorrow he would figure out how to move it. Tonight he would go home to Sophie and pretend everything was normal, that $500,000 was not sitting in a bank somewhere with his name on it, that his grandmother had not just handed him a mystery wrapped in a warning. But first he stood on the sidewalk in Chinatown and watched the city move around him. All these people living their lives, unaware that somewhere in the machinery of the world, something had shifted, some balance had tipped, and Jackson Chen, carpenter and veteran and father, had just been pushed onto a path he could not yet see but could already feel beneath his feet, solid and unavoidable as stone. The tiger protects its treasure. So must you. Jack pulled out his phone and called Sophie. She answered on the second ring. Hey Dad, what's up? Hey kiddo, listen, you're going to get that deposit for soccer and new cleats and whatever else you need. Dad, I told you, it's okay if I can't play. You're playing, I promise. Silence on the other end, then quietly, okay. I'll be home soon. Want me to pick up Chinese food? Yeah, that sounds good. He hung up and started walking back to his car, through streets where his grandmother had once walked, where she had built something from nothing, where she had learned that the world did not give you anything. You had to take it and hold it and protect it from everyone who wanted to take it away. Jack understood that now, understood it in his bones, in the scars on his hands from 20 years of working with wood, in the ringing in his ears from explosions half a world away, in the hollow ache of never having quite enough, of always being one disaster away from losing everything. But now he had $500,000 and a cabinet that weighed 700 pounds and held secrets that his grandmother had died protecting. Now he had a chance to change the story, to be more than the carpenter at the bottom of the family tree, to give Sophie the life she deserved. Now he had treasure. And like the tiger carved into rosewood and mystery, he would protect it. No matter what came next. The moving truck arrived at Margaret's house on a Saturday morning when the fog still clung to Russian Hill like smoke, refusing to clear. Jack stood on the sidewalk looking up at the Victorian mansion, 4 stories of painted lady architecture that had probably been beautiful once, but now just looked tired, like an old actress wearing too much makeup. He had brought help, 2 professional movers from a company that specialized in antiques, $200 an hour, money he did not have yet but would once the inheritance cleared. The will had specified $500,000 in cash, sitting in a bank account waiting for probate to finish, separate from whatever else Margaret might have left. And Dylan Carter, who had called Jack the night before with an offer that sounded more like a plea. I heard you need to move the cabinet. I can help. I'm stronger than I look. Dylan did not look strong. He looked like a strong wind would knock him over. But there was something in his voice, something desperate and earnest, that made Jack say yes. Now Dylan stood next to the truck, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that hung loose on his frame, his hands shaking slightly as he sipped from a thermos of coffee that probably was not just coffee. "Big place," Dylan said, looking up at the house. "Yeah. You ever been inside?" "Once, when I was a kid." The front door was locked, but Webb had given Jack a key, along with instructions that he had exactly 4 hours to remove the cabinet before Richard's people arrived to start cataloging everything else. 4 hours. After that, anything Jack left behind became Richard's problem, which meant it would disappear into auction houses and estate sales, scattered to the winds like leaves. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and mothballs and something else, something that might have been Margaret's perfume still lingering in the fabric of the place. The entry hall was large, with a staircase that curved up to the second floor, dark wood banisters polished to a shine that reflected the morning light coming through tall windows. Jack had forgotten how big the place was. Room after room filled with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Silk rugs that were probably worth more than his car. Paintings on the walls, landscapes and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. This was old money, accumulated slowly over decades, carefully preserved and displayed. The study was on the second floor at the end of a hallway lined with photographs. Jack paused at one, a black and white image from the 1960s. A young Margaret standing next to a man in a suit, both of them in front of a restaurant with Chinese characters on the sign. The man had his arm around Margaret's waist, protective, proud. Victor Lin, Jack's grandfather, dead 35 years now, a heart attack at 49 gone before Jack was born. He had been handsome, Victor. Strong features, confident posture, the kind of man who looked like he could handle anything the world threw at him. Margaret had loved him, everyone said so, had never remarried after he died, had built her empire alone and raised her children and lived in this big house full of memories and ghosts. The study door was unlocked. Jack pushed it open and there it was. The jade tiger cabinet stood against the far wall, massive and dark and intricately carved. 8.5 feet tall, maybe 6 feet wide, the kind of furniture that did not just occupy space but dominated it. The wood was rosewood, the real stuff, dense and heavy and worth a fortune just in raw material. But it was the carving that made you stop and stare. 5 tigers, each one different, moving through a landscape of mountains and forests. The detail was insane. You could see individual whiskers, the texture of fur, the muscles beneath the skin. Whoever had carved this had spent years on it, maybe a lifetime, pouring skill and patience into every inch. Jack ran his hand over the surface, feeling the grain, the subtle variations in the wood. This was museum-quality work, the kind of craftsmanship that did not exist anymore because nobody had the time or the skill or the willingness to spend years on a single piece. Dylan came up behind him, breathing a little hard from the stairs. "Jesus, that thing is massive. 700 pounds, according to the appraiser." "How are we getting it down the stairs?" "Good question." The movers arrived and spent 20 minutes just examining the cabinet, measuring doorways, calculating angles. The lead mover, a solid guy named Carlos with arms like bridge cables, shook his head. "This is going to be tricky. We'll need to remove some of the decorative elements to reduce weight, then use a pulley system for the stairs. 4 hours might not be enough." "Make it enough," Jack said. "I'm not leaving it here." They started with the top piece, an elaborate crown molding that added another 100 pounds. It came off in sections, carefully, each piece wrapped in blankets and carried down to the truck. Then the side panels, ornamental dragons that had been attached with wooden pegs, ancient joinery that still held tight after 250 years. Jack worked alongside them, his hands remembering the feel of wood, the weight and balance of it. This was what he understood, the physical reality of materials, the problem-solving of moving mass through space without breaking anything. For 2 hours they worked in careful silence, the kind of focused quiet that happens when the work is hard and the stakes are high. Dylan tried to help, but he was weak, his muscles wasted from whatever he was putting in his body. After dropping a panel and nearly cracking it, Carlos gently suggested he go wait by the truck. Dylan nodded, not arguing, just grateful not to be sent away entirely. By noon they had the cabinet stripped down to its core, 500 pounds instead of 700, still massive but manageable. They rigged a system of straps and pulleys, turned the cabinet on its side, and began the slow process of walking it down the stairs, inch by careful inch. Jack was at the bottom, guiding the weight, when he noticed something. A scratch on the wood, recent, the kind of mark that happens when someone forces a lock or pries at a seam. He looked closer. There were scratches on 3 of the panels, small but deliberate, like someone had been trying to open something that was not meant to open. "Hold up," he said. Carlos stopped, the cabinet suspended on the landing, held in place by tension and geometry. Jack examined the scratches more carefully. They were on the right side panel, clustered around one of the carved tigers, the third one from the top. Someone had been digging at it, trying to lever something loose. "What is it?" Carlos asked. "Nothing, let's keep moving." But it was not nothing. Someone had been looking for something in this cabinet, looking hard enough to damage the wood, to leave marks, and Jack would bet money he knew who. Richard. They got the cabinet down the stairs without dropping it, loaded it onto the truck, secured it with straps and blankets. The whole process took 3 hours and 40 minutes. As they were finishing, a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb and Richard got out, flanked by his 2 bodyguards. He walked over to Jack, looked at the truck, looked at the cabinet secured in the back. "You actually took it." "It's mine, the will said so." Richard's jaw tightened. "That piece of furniture is probably worth more than your apartment. What are you going to do with it? Sell it?" "That's none of your business." "Everything about grandmother's estate is my business. I'm the executor. I'm responsible for making sure everything is handled properly." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Jack, be smart about this. That cabinet is valuable, but it's also a pain in the ass. Storage, insurance, maintenance. Sell it to me. I'll give you 200,000 cash right now, no questions asked." 200,000. Less than what the appraisers had valued it at, but still a lot of money, more than Jack had ever seen in one place. "Why do you want it?" "Because it's a family heirloom. It should stay in the family, with someone who can properly care for it." Jack looked at Richard's face, at the careful neutrality of his expression, the businessman mask. But underneath there was something else. Eagerness. Need. "No thanks." "Jack, don't be stupid. The will gave it to me. I'm keeping it." Richard's mask slipped, just for a second, and Jack saw what was underneath. Anger, cold and calculating. Then it was gone, replaced by the polished smile. "Your choice. But don't come crying to me when you can't afford to store it, and it starts falling apart in your shitty apartment." He walked away, back to his Mercedes, his bodyguards following like shadows. Jack watched him drive off, feeling the weight of that conversation, the subtext beneath the words. Richard wanted this cabinet. Badly. The question was why. Getting the cabinet into Jack's apartment building was another nightmare. The elevator was too small, so they had to take it up the stairs, 3 flights, pivoting it around corners that were barely wide enough, scraping paint off the walls, disturbing neighbors who opened their doors and stared. By the time they got it into Jack's living room, it was 4 in the afternoon and everyone was exhausted. The cabinet sat there, dominating the small space, making everything else look cheap and temporary by comparison. Carlos and his partner collected their money and left, probably grateful to be done. Dylan lingered, standing in the doorway, looking at the cabinet with an expression Jack could not quite read. Hunger, maybe, or fear. "You want some water?" Jack asked. "Yeah, thanks." They sat at the small kitchen table, drinking water, not talking, both too tired for conversation. Finally, Dylan spoke. "Be careful with that thing, Jack." "What do you mean?" "I mean your grandmother didn't give it to you randomly. She had reasons, and those reasons might not be safe." "You know something." Dylan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his water glass. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I spent some time in prison. 5 years, did 3, got out on good behavior. While I was inside, I met a guy, old-timer named Frank Morrison. Cancer, dying, wanted to clear his conscience." Dylan looked up, met Jack's eyes. "Frank told me about a job he did back in 1987. A kidnapping. A little boy, 3 years old, taken from his backyard while his mother was at work." Jack's chest tightened. "Daniel. You know about him?" "I know he was my uncle's son. I know he was kidnapped and killed." "That's what everyone thinks. But Frank told me different. He said they didn't kill the boy. They sold him to a couple in Arizona who couldn't have kids, desperate people who didn't ask questions. Frank got $50,000. The couple got a son, and everyone thought the kid was dead." The room felt very still, very quiet. Outside, traffic hummed on the street below, normal life continuing while Jack's world tilted sideways. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Frank said something else before he died. He said the people who paid for the kidnapping, the ones who set it up, they were looking for something. Something valuable that Victor Lynn had hidden. They thought if they took his son, he'd give it up. But Victor paid the ransom and never told them where it was. And then he died, heart attack, sudden. Some people think the heart attack wasn't natural." Jack thought about Richard's scratches on the cabinet, about his offer to buy it, about the warning in Margaret's note. "Trust no one." "You think Richard knows about this?" "I think Richard knows more than he's saying. I think he's been looking for whatever Victor hid for a long time. And I think your grandmother knew that, which is why she made sure you got the cabinet instead of him." Dylan stood up, setting his glass in the sink with careful precision, like a man who had learned to be quiet in places where noise drew attention. "There's one more thing. When I got out of prison, I tried to find the kid, Daniel, or whatever his name is now. I traced the couple Frank sold him to, Carter family, Arizona. They died in a car accident 15 years ago. No record of what happened to their adopted son." He paused, something flickering across his face. "I'm 40 years old now, Jack, born in 1984, the same year Daniel Lynn would have been born. And sometimes I wonder if Frank told me that story for a reason." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. "Check the cabinet carefully, Jack, really carefully. Your grandmother was trying to tell you something." Then he was gone, leaving Jack alone with 700 pounds of carved rosewood and a story that made his skin crawl. Sophie came home an hour later, dropped her backpack by the door, and stopped dead when she saw the cabinet. "Holy crap, Dad, that thing is huge." "Language." "Sorry, but seriously, where did that come from?" "Grandmother's house. She left it to me in the will." Sophie walked around it slowly, studying the carved tigers, running her fingers over the intricate details. She had always been curious, always looking at things carefully, seeing what others missed. "It's beautiful," she said, "but why is it in our living room?" "Because it's worth a lot of money, and I don't trust storage facilities." She looked at him, that teenage look that said she knew he was not telling her everything. But she let it go, used to her father's silences, his habit of keeping problems to himself. "Can I put some of my stuff in it?" "Not yet, I need to examine it first." That night after Sophie went to bed, Jack made coffee and sat in front of the cabinet, really looking at it for the first time. He had spent 20 years working with wood, learning to read grain and joint, to see how pieces fit together. This cabinet was a masterwork of joinery. Everything fitted so precisely you could barely see the seams. But there were seams. There were always seams. He started at the top, running his hands over every inch, feeling for anything unusual. The wood was smooth, worn by centuries of hands, polished by time and care. The carvings were deep, each tiger rendered in such detail you could almost see them move. At midnight he was still searching, finding nothing. At 1 a.m. he was ready to give up, to accept that maybe Dylan was wrong. Maybe this was just a cabinet, beautiful and valuable, but ultimately just furniture. Then Sophie appeared in the doorway, wearing her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Dad, you're still up." "Yeah, I can't sleep." She came over, looked at the cabinet with fresh eyes. "What are you looking for?" "I don't know, maybe nothing." She studied the tigers, leaning close, her young eyes better than his in the dim light. "That one's weird." "Which one?" "Third from the top on the right. The eye is different, see? All the other tigers have flat eyes carved into the wood, but this one, the eye kind of sticks out like it's a separate piece." Jack looked. She was right. The third tiger's right eye was slightly raised, a millimeter maybe, barely noticeable, but there once you saw it. He pressed it gently. Click. The sound was soft but unmistakable, metal on wood, a mechanism engaging. A panel on the side of the cabinet shifted, moving outward a quarter inch, revealing a seam that had been invisible before. Jack and Sophie looked at each other, eyes wide. Then Jack gripped the edge of the panel and pulled. It swung open like a door, smooth and silent on hidden hinges. Behind it was a space, 4 inches deep, running the full height of the cabinet. And inside that space, stacked carefully, were packages. 21 packages wrapped in wax paper, tied with red silk cord, each one sealed with red wax stamped with the image of a tiger. Jack pulled one out with shaking hands. It was heavy, compact, the size of a brick. He unwrapped the paper carefully, and his brain stopped working for a second. Money, stacks of $100 bills bound with paper bands. He counted quickly. 200 bills, $20,000. He looked at Sophie. She looked at the cabinet, at the other 20 packages still inside. "Dad," she whispered, "how much is in there?" Jack did the math automatically, the way you do when numbers are too big to feel real. 21 packages, 20,000 each, $420,000. This was separate from the 500,000 in the bank account. This was extra. This was Margaret's secret, hidden for decades, waiting for someone careful enough to find it. They pulled out all 21 packages and laid them on the floor, a fortune in cash spread across the cheap carpet of a cheap apartment. Jack's hands would not stop shaking. This was not inheritance money declared in the will. This was hidden money, secret money, money that Margaret had kept concealed for reasons Jack was only beginning to understand. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the packages, her 14-year-old brain trying to process what they had found. "Is this legal?" she asked. "I don't know." "Should we call the police?" "No." The answer came immediately, instinctively. Vincent's warning echoed in his head. Trust no one. Margaret had hidden this money for a reason. She had built a secret compartment into a cabinet worth $250,000 and filled it with cash that she never deposited, never declared, never told anyone about. Except now she had told Jack in the only way she could, by leaving him the cabinet and trusting that he would look, that he would find, that he would understand. Inside one of the packages, wrapped around the money, was a small piece of paper. Jack unfolded it carefully. The paper was old, brittle, covered in Chinese characters he could not read, but at the bottom, in English, were 3 words. Yellow Bird Fund. Below that a number, 1 of 21. Jack checked the other packages. Each had a similar note. Yellow Bird Fund, numbered sequentially, 1 through 21. "What's Yellow Bird?" Sophie asked. "I don't know." But he could find out. He pulled out his phone and searched. Yellow Bird Operation, 1989. The results came back immediately. Operation Yellow Bird was a covert rescue mission run by MI6, CIA, and various Hong Kong organizations in the months following the Tiananmen Square massacre in June 1989. Its purpose was to smuggle pro-democracy activists, intellectuals, and students out of mainland China, helping them escape the government crackdown. The operation rescued over 400 people, moving them through secret routes from China to Hong Kong to eventual asylum in the West. It was funded through private donations and intelligence agency black budgets. Most details were still classified. Jack sat back, his mind racing. Victor Lin had died in 1989. Heart attack, sudden, right after Tiananmen. And now here was cash dated from that era, marked as Yellow Bird Fund. Victor had been involved. Somehow, someway, his grandfather had been part of a CIA operation to rescue Chinese dissidents. And this money, $420,000, was what remained. But why had Margaret kept it hidden? Why not deposit it, use it, donate it? Why secret it away in a cabinet and live with it for 35 years, never touching it, never spending it? Unless she was afraid, unless she knew that someone was looking for it. Jack's phone buzzed, text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk about what you found. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Dollars Park, come alone." No name, no signature. Jack stared at the message, feeling ice spread through his chest. Nobody should know he had found anything. The cabinet had been in his apartment for less than 8 hours. Unless someone had been watching. Unless someone had always been watching, waiting to see what Jack would do, whether he would be smart enough to find what Margaret had hidden. He looked at Sophie, sitting on the floor surrounded by packages of cash, her face pale in the dim light. "Go to bed, sweetheart." "Dad, what's happening?" "I don't know yet, but I need you to trust me, okay? Don't tell anyone about this. Not your friends, not your teachers, nobody. Can you do that?" She nodded, scared now, picking up on his fear. He helped her to her feet, walked her to her bedroom, tucked her in like she was still small, still safe, still living in a world where fathers could protect their children from everything. "It's going to be okay," he said, lying. Back in the living room, Jack carefully rewrapped the packages and put them back in the hidden compartment. He closed the panel, heard it click into place, invisible again. Then he sat on the couch and stared at the cabinet, this beautiful, deadly thing that his grandmother had left him. $420,000 in cash. A secret CIA operation. A kidnapped child who might still be alive. And Richard, scratching at the wood, looking for something, willing to pay $200,000 for a cabinet worth $250,000. Jack thought about the warning. The tiger protects its treasure. But what was the treasure? The money? Or something else, something bigger, something worth killing for? His phone buzzed again. Different number, but he knew before he looked what it would say. I know you found it. Give me half and I let you live. Refuse and Sophie has an accident. You have 48 hours. No name, no signature. But Jack knew the voice behind the words, could almost hear Richard's cold certainty, his businessman's calculation that everything was negotiable, everything had a price. Jack stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Oakland at night, at the streetlights and the shadows, at the world that had seemed hard but manageable yesterday, and now felt like it was full of hidden teeth. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He had thought he would shake, would panic, would feel the old PTSD rising up to choke him, but instead he felt something else. Clarity, purpose. The same cold focus that had kept him alive in Fallujah, that turned chaos into geometry, turned fear into fuel. Someone was threatening his daughter. Someone thought they could take what Margaret had given him, could use fear and violence to steal what was not theirs. They were wrong. Jack picked up his phone and scrolled through contacts until he found the one he needed. Dylan Carter, the man with prison eyes and secrets, the man who knew things about kidnapping and hidden treasures and families that lied, the 40-year-old who might be Daniel Lynn, who might be the ghost Margaret had been searching for all these years. Dylan answered on the third ring, his voice rough with sleep or drugs or both. Yeah. It's Jack, I found something, and I need your help. Silence, then, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jack hung up and looked at the cabinet one more time, at the 5 tigers carved into rosewood, frozen mid-hunt, eternal and patient and deadly. Margaret had known this would happen, had known that giving him the cabinet would paint a target on his back, would draw Richard out, would force Jack into a fight he had not chosen. But she had given it to him anyway, because she trusted him, because she believed he could handle it, because somewhere in this mess there was not just money but meaning, not just treasure but truth. The tiger protects its treasure. Jack walked to his bedroom and opened the closet, pushed aside the clothes and reached up to the top shelf. His hand closed around the case, military-grade plastic, heavy and familiar. He pulled it down, entered the combination, opened it. The Glock 19 sat in foam cutouts, cleaned and oiled ready. He had not touched it in 2 years, had not wanted it in the house with Sophie, had tried to leave that part of his life behind. But some things you could not leave behind. Some skills stayed with you, lived in your muscle memory, waited patient and ready for the moment when the world stopped being civil and started being what it really was. A place where the strong survived and the weak got eaten. A place where tigers hunted. Jack checked the magazine, loaded, 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. He worked the slide, felt the mechanical certainty of metal on metal, the weight and balance of a tool designed for a single purpose. Protection. Outside, a car pulled up. Dylan, early, eager, or maybe just desperate for something to do that felt like purpose. Jack closed the gun case and left it on the bed, visible, a statement of intent. Then he walked back to the living room and waited for Dylan to knock, for the next piece of this puzzle to fall into place, for the game to begin in earnest. $420,000, separate from the $500,000 in the bank. A secret CIA operation. A brother who made threats. And somewhere, buried in all of this, a truth that Margaret had died protecting, a treasure that was worth more than money, worth more than safety, worth the risk she had taken by trusting Jack with all of it. The knock came. Jack opened the door. Dylan stood there, thin and shaking but with eyes that were suddenly clear, suddenly sharp, the eyes of a man who had spent time in cages and learned to see threats before they arrived. At 40 years old, he looked older, worn by life and addiction, but there was something else underneath, a resemblance Jack had not noticed before. Something in the shape of his face, the set of his eyes, that reminded Jack of the old photographs in Margaret's hallway. "Show me," Dylan said. Jack stepped aside and let him in, closed the door, locked it. The tiger had found its treasure. Now came the part where they learned to protect it. Dylan stood in the center of Jack's living room, staring at the packages of cash spread across the coffee table like cards in a game nobody wanted to play. His hands had stopped shaking. That was the first thing Jack noticed. Whatever Dylan had been using to get through the day, he was stone-cold sober now, his eyes sharp and focused in a way that made Jack reassess everything he thought he knew about the man. 420,000, Dylan said, his voice flat. Yellow Bird Fund. Jesus Christ, your grandfather was running money for the CIA. You knew about this? I knew Victor Lin had connections. Everyone in Chinatown knew. But I thought it was just rumors, old stories people told to make their history sound more important than it was. Dylan picked up one of the packages, turned it over in his hands like he was checking for something. This is real. This is serious. And if Richard knows about it, you're in more danger than you think. Jack showed him the text messages. Dylan read them twice, his jaw tightening with each word. 48 hours. He's not messing around. I know. You can't go to the police. Not with this much cash. They'll ask questions you can't answer, and even if the money's clean, they'll tie it up in evidence for years. You'll never see it again. I wasn't planning on calling the police. Dylan looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the carpenter in work boots to something underneath. You were military. Marines to tour Iraq. Infantry. Scout sniper. Something changed in Dylan's posture, a subtle relaxation, the way soldiers recognized their own. DEA. 7 years before I got burned out and turned to the stuff I was supposed to be stopping. I know how to handle threats, Jack. I know how these things escalate. Richard won't wait 48 hours. He'll move faster, try to catch you off guard. As if on cue, Jack's phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. He answered on speaker. Jack Chen, a woman's voice, professional, cold. This is Bate Morrison with Child Protective Services. We've received a complaint regarding your daughter Sophie. We need to schedule a home visit within the next 24 hours to evaluate her living conditions. Jack's blood went ice cold. Who filed the complaint? I'm not at liberty to say, but the allegations are serious. Inadequate housing, financial instability, potential neglect. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to escalate this to the courts. My daughter is fine. She's healthy, she's fed, she's in school. Then you have nothing to worry about, Mr. Chen. We just need to verify that. I'll be at your address tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please make sure Sophie is home. She hung up before Jack could respond. He stood there holding the phone, feeling the trap close around him. This was Richard's play. Use the system, use bureaucracy and process and the law itself as a weapon. Get CPS involved, plant doubt, maybe even get Sophie removed temporarily while they investigated. And while Jack was dealing with that, while he was distracted and desperate, Richard would take what he wanted. Smart, Dylan said. Vicious, but smart. He's not coming at you directly because he knows you can fight back. He's hitting you where you can't defend. I need to get Sophie somewhere safe. Where? Richard has money, connections. He can find her anywhere in the Bay Area. Jack thought about it, running through options, discarding them one by one. Then it came to him. My old unit. There's a guy, Marcus Webb, runs a security company in Sacramento. Ex-Marine, owes me a favor from Fallujah. He's got a safe house he uses for witness protection overflow. Can you trust him? With my life, with Sophie's life. Dylan nodded. Then call him now. Get her out tonight before Richard knows you're moving." Jack made the call. Marcus answered immediately, his voice still carrying that parade ground authority even after 15 years as a civilian. They spoke in the shorthand of men who had shared a war, who understood that some favors you paid back without question, without hesitation. "Bring her to me," Marcus said. "Nobody will find her. And Jack, bring yourself too. Whatever you're into, you don't have to face it alone." "I appreciate that, but this is my fight." "Semper Fi, brother, means we don't leave people behind." Jack hung up and went to Sophie's room. She was still awake, lying in bed with her phone, pretending to do homework but really just scrolling, the way teenagers did when the world felt too big and scary to face directly. "Pack a bag," he said. "You're going on a trip." She sat up, fear flashing across her face. "Dad, what's happening?" "I'm keeping you safe. That's all you need to know right now." "For how long?" "I don't know. A few days, maybe a week." "What about school? What about soccer?" "Sophie," he sat on the edge of her bed, took her hand. "Do you trust me?" "Yes." "Then trust me now. Pack clothes for a week. Bring your schoolwork. I'm taking you somewhere nobody can hurt you, and I'm coming back here to handle the people who think they can threaten my family." She looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much, that had learned too young that the world was not safe, that fathers could not always protect their children from everything. But she nodded, got up, started pulling clothes from her dresser. An hour later they were on Interstate 80, heading east toward Sacramento, the city lights of Oakland falling away behind them. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, quiet, staring out at the darkness. Dylan followed in his own car, a beat-up Civic that burned oil and rattled but kept moving, watching their six, making sure nobody was tailing them. Jack's phone buzzed, text from Richard. "Running won't help. I know where you're going. I know everything." Jack deleted it without responding. Bluffs and intimidation, standard tactics for a man used to winning through fear. But Richard had never been in a firefight, had never learned the fundamental truth that fear only worked if you let it. They reached Sacramento at midnight. Marcus's safe house was in a suburb called Carmichael, a bland neighborhood of ranch houses and retired couples where nothing interesting ever happened, which made it perfect for disappearing. Marcus met them at the door, 6'2" and 230 pounds of muscle gone slightly soft around the middle but still dangerous, still capable. He looked at Sophie, then at Jack, understanding everything without needing explanation. "She'll be safe here. I've got 2 guys on rotation, both former Force Recon. Nobody gets through that door unless I say so." Jack hugged Sophie tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, the reality of her, trying to memorize this moment in case it was the last peaceful one they had for a while. "I'll call you every day," he said. "And when this is over, I'm taking you somewhere nice, anywhere you want. We'll use some of that inheritance money, do something we've never done before. I just want you to come back, Dad." "I will, I promise." He left her there, walked back to his car, felt the weight of her absence like a physical thing. Dylan was waiting, leaning against his Civic, smoking a cigarette that smelled like cloves and regret. "Now what?" Dylan asked. "Now we find out what Richard really wants, and we make sure he doesn't get it." They drove back to Oakland through the empty hours between midnight and dawn, that liminal time when the highways belonged to truckers and insomniacs, and people running from things they could not name. Jack's mind was clear, sharp, the way it got before a mission. All the noise and doubt and fear burned away, leaving only purpose. Back at his apartment, Jack made coffee while Dylan examined the cabinet again, running his hands over the wood. feeling for more hidden compartments, more secrets. "The money's not all of it," Dylan said. "There's got to be more, something bigger. Richard wouldn't risk CPS involvement, wouldn't threaten a kid, not for 420,000. He's worth millions. This has to be about something else." Jack thought about Vincent's warning, about the note Margaret had left. The tiger protects its treasure. Not treasures, plural. Treasure, singular. One thing, one secret worth protecting, with puzzles and warnings and carefully orchestrated inheritance. "Check the bottom," Jack said. "Where the packages were stacked, see if there's anything else." Dylan opened the hidden compartment, pulled out all the packages, felt around inside. His hand stopped, fingers finding something. He pulled out a piece of paper, old and yellowed, folded into a small square. It was a map, hand-drawn in ink that had faded to brown, showing a network of tunnels beneath what looked like Chinatown. Streets were marked, buildings labeled in Chinese characters, and at the center, marked with a red X, was a location beneath a building on Waverly Place. Gold Mountain Storage, 1962, was written at the bottom in English, along with coordinates and what looked like compass directions. Jack pulled out his phone and searched for Gold Mountain Storage. Nothing. The business did not exist anymore, probably had not existed for decades, but the building might still be there. He checked Google Maps, found Waverly Place in Chinatown, a narrow alley lined with old buildings that had probably stood since before the 1906 earthquake. One building in particular caught his attention. The address matched the coordinates on the map. "This is it," Jack said. "This is what Richard's looking for, not the money in the cabinet, whatever's buried under Chinatown." "Operation Yellow Bird," Dylan said slowly, thinking it through. "They smuggled people out of China after Tiananmen, but to do that they needed resources. Money, documents, safe houses. What if Victor Lin was more than just a money courier? What if he was hiding something for them, something valuable?" Jack thought about his grandfather, the man he had never met, the legend who had built a shipping empire and died young and left behind more questions than answers. A man who had worked with the CIA, who had hidden $420,000 in a cabinet and drawn a map to something buried under the city. "We need to go there, tonight, before Richard figures out what we're doing." Dylan looked at him like he was crazy. "Jack, if there's really something down there, something valuable enough to kill for, Richard's not the only one looking. There could be traps, security, other people who know about this. We'd be walking in blind." "Then we go prepared." Jack opened his gun case, pulled out the Glock 19, checked the magazine again. 15 rounds plus one in the chamber. He had another 2 magazines in the case, 46 rounds total. Enough for a small war, more than enough for whatever waited in the tunnels under Chinatown. Dylan disappeared into the bathroom and came back with something wrapped in an oil cloth. He unfolded it to reveal a Sig Sauer P226, the gun DEA agents carried, worn but clean, ready. "I kept it when they fired me, figured I might need it someday." "You know how to use it still." "Muscle memory doesn't forget. Besides, I've been sober 8 hours now. Longest stretch in 3 years. Clarity's a hell of a drug." They loaded up. Guns, flashlights, a small crowbar in case they needed to pry open doors or grates. Jack strapped a knife to his ankle, a ka-bar he had carried in Iraq, 7 inches of steel that had saved his life more than once. At 3 in the morning they drove to Chinatown, parked 3 blocks away on a side street where the meter maids would not ticket until 8 a.m. The neighborhood was quiet, the restaurants closed, the tourists long gone. Only the homeless remained, bundled in doorways, invisible to anyone who did not want to see them. Waverly Place was barely wide enough for 1 car. the buildings pressing close on both sides, their upper floors leaning out over the street like old men whispering secrets. The address they wanted was a 4-story brick structure, generic and unremarkable, the ground floor occupied by a shuttered herbalist shop, the windows dark. "How do we get in?" Dylan asked. Jack studied the building. There would be a basement, probably an alley entrance for deliveries. He walked around the corner, found a narrow passage between buildings, followed it to a loading dock at the rear. The door was locked but old, the kind of lock a crowbar could convince to open without too much noise. 3 minutes later they were inside, in a basement that smelled like ginger and dried mushrooms and the particular mustiness of places that had been closed up for decades. Jack switched on his flashlight, swept the beam across the space. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars and boxes and bags of herbs, all covered in dust, all untouched for years. But at the back, behind a shelf stacked with empty crates, Jack found what he was looking for. A metal grate set into the floor, secured with a padlock that had rusted nearly through. He broke it with the crowbar in one hard pull. The grate came up with a screech of metal on concrete, revealing a hole dropping straight down into darkness. A ladder was bolted to the wall, iron rungs disappearing into the black. Jack tested the first one. Solid. He looked at Dylan. "You don't have to come." "Yes, I do." Jack went down first, the flashlight between his teeth, the Glock in his right hand, left hand on the rungs. The ladder went down 20 feet, ending at a tunnel carved through bedrock, shored up with timber supports that looked like they dated to the gold rush. This was old San Francisco, the city beneath the city, the secret infrastructure that the Chinese community had built to move goods and people when the law said they were not welcome above ground. During Prohibition, these tunnels had run bootleg liquor. During World War II, they had hidden families from internment. And in 1989, they had apparently hidden something for the CIA. The tunnel ran east, toward the heart of Chinatown. Jack followed it, Dylan behind him, both of them moving quiet, weapons ready. The air was cool and damp, carrying the smell of earth and old stone. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing brick walls and dirt floors and the occasional side passage branching off into deeper darkness. After 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, maybe 20 feet across, the ceiling vaulted with brick archwork that looked like it belonged in a cathedral. And in the center of the chamber, sitting on a concrete plinth, was a safe. Not a modern safe, electronic and sleek. This was an antique, a massive iron box with a combination dial and a wheel handle, the kind banks used in the 1930s. It stood 5 feet tall, 3 feet wide, painted green with gold trim that had flaked away over the decades. Jack approached it slowly, checking for tripwires, pressure plates, any sign that someone had been here before them. The dust was thick, undisturbed. Whatever was in this safe, it had been waiting a long time. He examined the lock. Combination dial, numbers 0 through 99, requiring 3 numbers in sequence to open. Millions of possible combinations, impossible to crack without the code or a lot of time and explosives. Dylan ran his hand over the safe's surface, feeling the metal, the weight of it. "This thing weighs probably 2,000 pounds. We're not moving it. We need the combination or we need to blow it." "I don't have explosives." "Neither do I." Jack pulled out the map, studied it again in the flashlight beam. There had to be a clue, something Margaret or Victor had left, some way to open this without destroying it. He looked at the edges of the map, the notations, the careful detail. And there in the corner, almost invisible, 3 numbers written in faint pencil. 37, 52, 6. He tried them. Right 37, left 52, right 6. The dial clicked through the sequence. On the third number, he heard something deep inside the mechanism shift, tumblers aligning, decades of rust and disuse protesting but yielding. Jack gripped the wheel handle and pulled. The door swung open on hinges that screamed, revealing the interior of the safe, 3 feet of depth packed with contents that made Jack's breath catch. Gold bars, not coins, not jewelry. Solid gold ingots stamped with Chinese characters and the year 1989, each one about the size of a brick, each one heavy enough to require 2 hands. They were stacked in neat rows like books on a shelf, dozens of them. Jack pulled one out, felt the weight, maybe 20 pounds. At current gold prices, $1,500 an ounce, 16 ounces to a pound, this single bar was worth close to $500,000. And there were not just dozens, there were hundreds. Dylan made a sound that was half laugh, half something else, something desperate and amazed and terrified all at once. Jesus Christ, how much is here? Jack did the math in his head, counting rows, estimating. 250 bars, maybe more. At 500,000 each, that's over $100 million. $100 million in gold, hidden under Chinatown for 35 years, waiting for someone to find it, to claim it, to understand what it meant. Operation Yellow Bird, Jack said quietly. This was the fund, not just the 420,000. This was the real money, the capital they used to move people, to bribe officials, to buy safe passage. And Victor was the banker. Why didn't he use it? Maybe he died before he could. Maybe he was going to and someone stopped him. Heart attack at 49, sudden, convenient. What if it wasn't natural? The sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel, multiple people moving fast, not bothering to be quiet. Jack killed his flashlight, pulled Dylan behind the safe, both of them going into the shadows, weapons ready. Lights appeared at the tunnel entrance. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, sweeping the chamber. Voices, low and controlled, the sound of professionals who knew what they were doing. There, the safe's open. Richard's voice, cold, satisfied, victorious. He walked into the chamber surrounded by 4 men, all of them armed, all of them moving with the coordinated precision of security contractors. Richard looked at the open safe, at the gold bars visible inside, and smiled. I knew you'd find it. I knew grandmother would leave you the clues. That's why I let you have the cabinet, Jack. Why I followed you, waited for you to do the work. You always were good at following orders, at solving problems. Just never smart enough to know when you were being used. Jack stepped out of the shadows, Glock leveled at Richard's center mass. The 4 contractors swung their weapons toward him but froze when they saw Dylan emerge from the other side, Sig Sauer tracking across them. Mexican standoff. 6 guns, dim light, bad angles. You're not taking this, Jack said. Richard laughed. I already have taken it. You just haven't realized it yet. Do you know why I let you get Sophie out of Oakland? Because I wanted you focused here, wanted you committed to this fight. And while you were busy playing detective, my people were at your apartment. Ice flooded Jack's veins. What did you do? Nothing permanent, yet, but we have the cabinet, we have the cash, and we have leverage. One of the contractors, a bull-necked man with dead eyes, held up a phone, showed Jack the screen. A photo of Jack's apartment, ransacked, the cabinet gone, everything torn apart. Here's how this works, Richard continued. You walk away. Leave the gold, leave the city, take Sophie and disappear. Do that and I let you live. Try to fight me, try to claim any of this and I will destroy you. I will take Sophie, I will have you arrested for theft, I will burn your life to ash. Do you understand? Jack's finger tightened on the trigger, muscle memory calculating the shot, the distance, the trajectory. Center mass, double tap, move to the next target. He could drop 2, maybe 3 before they returned fire. Dylan would get 1 or 2 more. But they were outnumbered and outgunned and fighting in the dark against professionals. "Lower the weapon, Jack." A new voice coming from the tunnel entrance. Jack glanced that direction, and his blood went cold. FBI agent Marcus Cole walked into the chamber, badge hanging from his neck, service weapon drawn. Behind him, 3 more agents, all armed, all looking at Jack and Dylan like they were the criminals here. "Jackson Chen, Dylan Carter, you're under arrest for theft of federal property, breaking and entering and possession of stolen goods." Cole's voice was flat, bureaucratic, the sound of a man who had done this 1,000 times and felt nothing about it anymore. "Put down your weapons. Now." Jack looked at Richard, saw the smile, the triumph. This had all been planned. Richard had not just followed them. He had brought the FBI, had set this up to look like Jack was the thief, like he was stealing gold that belonged to the government, to Operation Yellow Bird, to history. Dylan lowered his gun slowly, set it on the ground. He looked at Jack, and in that look was resignation, acceptance. "We lost," the look said. "We tried, but we lost." Jack thought about Sophie, safe in Sacramento. About the cabinet, stolen from his apartment. About $420,000 in cash that Richard now controlled. About his grandmother, Margaret, who had tried to give him something precious and seen it taken by the golden child, the favored son, the one who always won. The tiger protects its treasure. But what happened when the tiger was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, beat? Jack set his gun down, raised his hands. Agent Cole stepped forward, pulled out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." The metal closed around Jack's wrists, cold and final. Richard walked to the safe, ran his hand over the gold bars like a man touching something he had dreamed about for years. "Thank you, Jack, really. I couldn't have done this without you." They led Jack and Dylan out of the chamber, up through the tunnels, into the basement, into the cold San Francisco dawn. A black SUV was waiting, FBI seals on the doors. They put Jack in the back, separated from Dylan, isolated and alone. As the vehicle pulled away, Jack looked back at the building on Waverly Place, at the secret underneath, at the fortune his grandfather had hidden and his grandmother had protected and his brother had stolen. He thought about the warning, "Trust no one." Margaret had known Richard was dangerous, had known the FBI might be compromised, had known that giving Jack the clues might lead exactly here, to this moment, to this defeat. But she had given them to him anyway. Why? The SUV drove through Chinatown, through the financial district, toward the federal building where Jack would be processed, fingerprinted, photographed, locked in a cell while Richard took everything. But as they drove, Jack replayed every moment, every choice, every piece of the puzzle. The cabinet with its hidden compartment. The cash-marked Yellow Bird Fund. The map with 3 numbers that opened the safe. The gold bars worth $100 million. And Richard's smile when he said, "I already have taken it." Past tense, already, not taking, not will take, already have. Which meant Richard had not just figured out Jack's plan. He had known about the gold all along, had known where it was, what the numbers meant, how to get to it. He had not needed Jack to find it. He had needed Jack to open it. The safe had been closed, locked, inaccessible. Richard could have found it years ago but could not get inside without the combination. He could have hired safecrackers, used explosives, tried to brute force it open. But all of that carried risk, drew attention, left evidence. Better to wait, to watch, to let someone else take the risk of finding the combination, of opening the safe, of exposing themselves to federal agents who could arrest them for theft while Richard walked away clean. Better to use Jack as a tool, a weapon against himself. The SUV stopped at a red light. Jack looked out the window at the city waking up, at people heading to work, at the normal world continuing its normal rhythm, unaware that in the spaces underneath, in the tunnels and secrets and hidden places, wars were being fought and lost. He thought about Sophie, safe for now but not forever, about the inheritance that had seemed like salvation and turned into a trap, about his grandmother's trust, her belief that he could handle this, that he was strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough. Maybe she had been wrong. Or maybe she had known exactly what would happen and had a plan he could not yet see. The tiger protects its treasure. The light turned green. The SUV drove on. And in the back seat, handcuffed and defeated, Jack closed his eyes and started planning what came next. Because this was not over. Not even close. The interrogation room at the San Francisco FBI field office was exactly what Jack expected. Gray walls, gray table, gray chairs bolted to the floor, a mirror that was obviously one-way glass, a camera in the corner with a red light that never blinked. The whole space designed to make you feel small, isolated, guilty, even if you were not. Jack sat with his hands folded on the table, waiting. They had separated him from Dylan 3 hours ago, taken his phone, his wallet, his belt and shoes. Standard procedure for federal detention, treating everyone like a flight risk even when there was nowhere to run. Agent Marcus Cole entered carrying a file folder, set it on the table without opening it, took the chair across from Jack. He looked tired, bags under his eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came from years of working cases that never quite closed, never quite delivered the satisfaction of justice. "You're in serious trouble, Mr. Chen." Jack said nothing. Breaking and entering, theft of federal property. The gold bars in that safe are part of an ongoing investigation into Operation Yellow Bird. They belong to the United States government. By opening that safe, by accessing those assets, you committed multiple federal crimes. I didn't know they were there. You had a map. You had the combination. You went into those tunnels armed with an illegal firearm. That's premeditation, Mr. Chen. That's intent. Jack leaned back, studied Cole's face. Mid-50s, wedding ring worn thin from years of nervous fidgeting, a coffee stain on his tie that he had not bothered to clean. A man going through motions, playing a role, but something underneath was wrong. The performance was too smooth, too rehearsed. "Where's Dylan Carter?" Jack asked. "In custody, being questioned separately." "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet. That depends on how cooperative you are." Jack almost smiled. Not yet meant they did not have enough evidence to charge him, which meant they were fishing, trying to build a case from testimony and confession. And if they were fishing, that meant Richard had not given them everything, had not handed over all the pieces. "I want a lawyer." Cole's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. "That's your right, but lawyers complicate things, slow things down, and the longer this takes, the worse it gets for you. Your daughter's still in CPS custody. You want to see her again, you need to help me help you." The threat was naked, obvious. Cooperate or lose Sophie. But Jack had spent 2 tours in Iraq learning to spot lies, learning to read the micro-expressions that gave away fear and deception. Cole was bluffing. CPS had not taken Sophie because Sophie was not in Oakland anymore, was in Sacramento with Marines who would die before letting anyone touch her. "I want a lawyer," Jack repeated. Cole stood up, took his folder, walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back, and for just a moment the mask dropped completely. Jack saw what was underneath. Not an FBI agent doing his job. A man terrified, desperate, in over his head. "Your brother's going to destroy you. You know that, right? He's got connections you can't imagine. Money, power, people in places you can't reach. If you fight him, you'll lose everything. If you cooperate with me, maybe I can protect you. Maybe." Then he was gone, the door closing with a heavy click, the lock engaging. Jack sat alone in the gray room and thought about what Cole had just revealed. Your brother's going to destroy you. Not might. Going to. Present tense, inevitability, like it was already happening. Which meant Cole was working for Richard. Or with him. Or was being controlled by him somehow, leveraged and manipulated the same way Jack was being leveraged and manipulated. Everyone just pieces on a board Richard was playing. The door opened again. Not Cole this time. A woman in her 40s, Korean features, expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed private practice, not public defender. "Mr. Chen, I'm Grace Kim. I've been retained to represent you." Jack stood up. "I didn't hire a lawyer." "Your sister did. Vanessa Chen contacted my office 2 hours ago, paid my retainer in full, and instructed me to get you out of here immediately." She set her briefcase on the table, pulled out papers. "I've reviewed the arrest report. They have nothing concrete. No warrant for the search of the tunnels, no evidence you knew the gold was there, no proof of criminal intent. You're being held on suspicion, which means they have 72 hours to charge you or release you. I'm going to make sure they don't have anything to charge you with." "Why would Vanessa help me?" Grace looked at him directly, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Because she's terrified. Because Richard threatened her too. And because she has information that could bring him down, but she needs you alive and free to use it." She pulled out a phone, not hers, a burner still in the plastic packaging. "When you're released, call this number. Vanessa will explain everything. But right now, we need to focus on getting you out." The next 6 hours were a blur of legal maneuvering, of Grace systematically dismantling the FBI's case against Jack, pointing out irregularities, demanding documentation that did not exist, threatening lawsuits and misconduct charges until Cole's supervisor, a stern woman named Sarah Nguyen, intervened and shut the whole thing down. "Release him," Nguyen told Cole. "We don't have probable cause. We don't have jurisdiction, and we definitely don't have time to babysit a civilian who was clearly manipulated into opening that safe." Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but Nguyen's expression stopped him. She knew something was wrong, knew Cole was compromised, was pulling rank to cut the corruption out before it spread further. They released Jack at 8 p.m., gave him back his belongings, escorted him to the front entrance of the federal building. Dylan was already there, looking worse for wear, his hands shaking again, the 8 hours of sobriety burned away by stress and interrogation. Grace handed them both burner phones. "Call Vanessa, tonight she's waiting." Then she was gone, disappearing into the San Francisco evening, leaving Jack and Dylan standing on the sidewalk like refugees, shell-shocked and displaced. "What now?" Dylan asked. Jack activated the burner phone, dialed the only number programmed into it. Vanessa answered immediately. "Jack, thank God, are you okay?" "I'm out. What's going on, Vanessa?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at the Palace Hotel, room 412. 1 hour. Come alone." "Well, you and Dylan, I know he's with you." "How did you know?" "Because I've been watching everything, tracking everything, trying to protect you from Richard while keeping myself alive. Just get here, please. I'll explain everything." The line went dead. Jack looked at Dylan, saw his own uncertainty reflected back. "Could be a trap," Dylan said. Everything's a trap. Doesn't mean we don't walk into it. They took a cab to the Palace Hotel, a historic landmark in downtown San Francisco, the kind of place where rooms cost $500 a night and the lobby looked like a European cathedral. Room 412 was on the fourth floor, down a hallway carpeted in patterns that probably cost more than Jack's car. Vanessa opened the door before they knocked. She looked different than she had at the will reading. The polished veneer was gone, replaced by something raw and frightened. No makeup, hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt instead of designer clothes. This was Vanessa stripped down to basics, a woman in survival mode. "Come in quickly." The room was small but elegant, a single queen bed and a desk covered in papers, laptops, external hard drives. A makeshift command center, the tools of someone trying to build a case or plan an escape. "I know you have questions," Vanessa said, locking the door behind them. "Let me start by saying I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't warn you earlier, didn't stop this before it went this far. But Richard had leverage on me, has leverage, and I was too scared to fight back." "What kind of leverage?" Jack asked. $2 million. I stole it from my firm's clients, used it to cover gambling debts. Securities fraud, embezzlement, enough to put me in federal prison for 15 years. Richard found out 6 months ago. He's been using it to control me ever since. She pulled out a laptop, opened files. Bank statements, trading records, emails. All the evidence of her crimes, carefully documented, ready to be handed to prosecutors. "He made me help him spy on you, track your movements, report everything you did. That's how he knew about the tunnels, how he knew when you'd be there. I gave him all of it because I was terrified." "Then why help me now?" Jack asked. "Because I found something Richard doesn't know I have." She clicked through files until she reached a video. Timestamp from 6 months ago, security camera footage from inside Margaret's house. "Watch." The video showed Margaret's study. Richard entered alone, started searching through the cabinet, running his hands over the wood exactly the way Jack had, looking for hidden compartments. But he was not careful, not respectful. He pried at the carvings with a knife, leaving the scratches Jack had noticed, growing frustrated when nothing opened. Then Margaret walked in. The video had no audio, but you did not need sound to understand what happened next. Margaret saw what Richard was doing, confronted him. Richard said something, his face twisted with anger. Margaret shook her head, pointed to the door, clearly telling him to leave. Richard grabbed her arm, hard enough that Margaret flinched, tried to pull away. He got close to her face, said something that made her go very still, very pale. Then he released her and walked out. The video ended. "He assaulted her," Vanessa said quietly. "Our 85-year-old grandmother, and he grabbed her, threatened her. I found this footage after she died, hidden in her security system. She'd saved it, probably as insurance, probably planning to use it if Richard tried anything." Jack felt something cold and hard settle into his chest. Rage, but controlled, focused, the kind of anger that did not explode but burned steady and hot. "There's more," Vanessa continued. She opened another file. Medical records, autopsy reports, documents marked confidential. "I hired a private investigator, had him look into Victor Lynn's death. The official cause was heart attack, massive coronary, very sudden. But I found something interesting. Victor's personal physician, Dr. Raymond Zhao, was paid $500,000 6 months after Victor died. Cash payment, no explanation." "Richard paid him off," Dylan said. "Exactly. To change the autopsy results, to make murder look like natural causes. I can't prove it definitively, but I have bank records, I have the timing, I have motive. Victor knew about the gold. Richard wanted it. Victor wouldn't tell him where it was, so Richard killed him." She pulled out a flash drive, held it up like a talisman. Everything's on here. The assault video, the financial records, evidence of Richard's connections to organized crime, money laundering, fraud, enough to put him in prison for life. But I can't use it alone. If I go to the FBI, Richard will have me arrested first, will paint me as a disgruntled embezzler trying to frame him. I need you, Jack. I need someone clean, someone credible, someone who can stand up in court and make this stick. Jack took the flash drive, felt the weight of it, lighter than air but heavy with consequence. Why me? Why not go to a prosecutor, to the media? Because Richard owns people. Judges, politicians, FBI agents like Cole. He spent years building a network, buying loyalty, creating leverage. But you're outside that network. You're a veteran, a father, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. You're the one person he can't control. He threatened Sophie. And I can protect her. I have resources Richard doesn't know about. Money hidden offshore, contacts who owe me favors. I can get Sophie somewhere safe, somewhere he can't touch her, but only if you help me take him down. Jack looked at Dylan, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. They were being offered a deal, an alliance with someone who had betrayed them before and might betray them again. But Vanessa was right about one thing. They needed each other. Alone, they were all vulnerable. Together, they might have a chance. "What's your plan?" Jack asked. Vanessa smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, she looked like the confident woman from the will reading, the hedge fund executive who made million-dollar decisions without blinking. "We set a trap. We make Richard think he's won, that he has the gold and the money and everything he wanted. Then we expose him publicly, all at once, in a way he can't deny or spin or escape. We destroy him the same way he's been destroying us." She pulled up another document, a detailed timeline, a strategy that must have taken weeks to plan. Jack read through it, seeing the logic, the careful sequencing, the way each piece built on the last. "This could work," Dylan said slowly. "But it's risky. If Richard figures out what we're doing before we're ready, we're all dead. Then we don't give him time to figure it out. We move fast, we move smart, and we hit him where he's weakest." Vanessa looked at Jack. "I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I've done terrible things. But I'm asking you to trust me now. Not because I've earned it, because we're out of other options." Jack thought about Sophie, safe in Sacramento for now but not forever. About the gold worth $100 million that Richard was probably already moving, already finding ways to convert into liquid assets. About Margaret, dead and buried but still trying to protect her family from beyond the grave, still trying to make things right. "I'm in," Jack said, "but we do this my way. Military precision, clear objectives, exit strategies for when things go wrong. And if you betray us again, Vanessa, I won't go to the police. I'll handle it myself." She nodded, understanding the threat, accepting it. Fair enough. Over the next 3 hours they planned. Vanessa laid out what she knew. Richard had the gold but could not move it openly. It was federal property, subject to investigation, watched by Agent Nguyen, who was clean and competent and would not be bought. So Richard was stuck, sitting on a fortune he could not access, at least not legally. But Richard would find a way. He always did. Probably already had buyers lined up, criminal organizations who would pay cash for gold bars, no questions asked. Chinese triads, Russian mafia, Mexican cartels. All of them needed to wash money, to convert liquid assets into something stable and valuable. "He'll make the sale within 48 hours, Vanessa predicted. "Before the FBI locks everything down, before Nguyen gets a court order to seize the gold as evidence. We need to catch him in the act, document the transaction, prove he's selling stolen federal property." "How do we do that?" Jack asked. "We follow him. We watch every move, every meeting, every phone call. I have contacts in private security, people who can tail him without being spotted, and we record everything." Dylan shook his head. "That's not enough. Recording a criminal transaction is good, but it's not definitive. Richard will claim he was entrapped, that he was trying to recover stolen property, that he had every right to sell it. We need more. We need him to confess." "He'll never confess," Vanessa said. "Not to the FBI, not to a prosecutor, but maybe to family." Dylan looked at Jack. "What if you confronted him? Wore a wire, got him talking, got him to admit what he did to Victor, to Margaret. Make it personal, make him angry enough to slip up." It was dangerous, reckless even. But Jack had been in worse situations, had walked into ambushes knowing they were ambushes because sometimes that was the only way to win. "I'll do it, but we need backup. Real backup, not just security contractors. We need people I trust, people who know how to handle threats." He pulled out his burner phone, called Marcus Webb in Sacramento. Explained the situation in brief, tactical terms. Marcus listened without interrupting, the way good soldiers did when receiving orders. "I can be there in 90 minutes with 3 guys. All former Marines, all solid. What do you need us to do?" "Provide overwatch. Keep eyes on the situation, be ready to extract me if things go sideways. And protect Sophie no matter what happens. That's priority 1. "Roger that, give me a location." They set the meeting for tomorrow night. A warehouse in the Dogpatch neighborhood, industrial, isolated, the kind of place where privacy was guaranteed and violence could happen without witnesses. Vanessa would leak the location to Richard through a cutout, make him think it was a meeting to negotiate terms, to split the gold. Richard would come. He could not resist the opportunity to gloat, to rub Jack's face in his victory. And when he did, they would be ready. The planning session broke up near midnight. Dylan left first, heading to a motel where Vanessa had booked him a room, a safe place to sleep and detox properly. Vanessa packed up her laptops, preparing to move to a different hotel, never staying in one place too long, always assuming Richard was tracking her. Jack was the last to leave. At the door, Vanessa caught his arm. "Thank you for trusting me, for giving me a chance to make this right." "Don't thank me yet, we haven't won, we haven't even survived. But we're fighting back. That's more than I've done in 6 months." Jack walked out into the San Francisco night, the city lit up and alive, tourists and locals mixing on sidewalks, restaurants and bars spilling light and noise into the streets. Normal life, ordinary existence, the world that had nothing to do with gold and murder and family betrayals. He thought about calling Sophie but decided against it. She was safe, she was protected, and hearing his voice would only make her worry more. Better to let her sleep, let her have one more night of not knowing how close to the edge they were dancing. Instead, Jack walked, letting his feet carry him through the financial district, through Chinatown, past the building on Waverly Place where underneath, in tunnels carved through bedrock, a fortune waited in a safe that was probably empty now, cleaned out by Richard's people, the gold already moving through channels that led to buyers who would never ask where it came from. He thought about Victor, his grandfather who he had never met, who had worked with the CIA and hidden money for refugees and died suddenly at 49. A heart attack, the records said. But Jack knew killers, knew how easy it was to make murder look like something else, how a needle full of poison could stop a heart just as effectively as a bullet, how money could buy silence and complicity and altered autopsy reports. Richard had killed Victor. Jack was certain of it now. Had killed his own stepfather for gold, for money, for the kind of wealth that made men lose their humanity and become something else, something predatory and cold. But Richard had made a mistake. He had threatened Sophie, had crossed the line from greed to something worse, something Jack could not forgive or forget or let slide. Tomorrow they would set the trap. Tomorrow Richard would walk into it, confident and arrogant, believing he had already won. And Jack would be waiting. He walked back to where Dylan's car was parked, a beat-up Civic that ran rough but ran. Dylan had left him the keys, understanding that Jack needed mobility, needed independence, needed to feel like he had some control even when everything was spinning out of control. Jack drove across the Bay Bridge back to Oakland, back to his apartment that had been ransacked and emptied. The cabinet was gone. The cash was gone. Everything Margaret had left him, taken by Richard's people while Jack was locked in an interrogation room, helpless and manipulated. But they had missed something. Jack went to his bedroom, opened the closet, pushed aside the hanging clothes. On the top shelf behind a box of old tax returns was a metal case. He pulled it down, opened it. The Glock 19 was still there. So were the extra magazines, the ammunition, the knife. They had taken the furniture but missed the weapons, which meant they were amateurs, security contractors doing a job, not professionals who understood that the most dangerous things in a room were never the obvious ones. Jack loaded the Glock, chambered around, holstered it at his waist beneath his jacket. The weight was familiar, comforting, a promise that he was not helpless, not beaten, not done fighting. His phone buzzed. The burner Vanessa had given him, text message from an unknown number. "I know what you're planning, it won't work, but I admire the effort. See you tomorrow, little brother." Richard, somehow he knew or suspected, or was just confident enough to taunt Jack even while the trap was being set. Jack typed back a single word. "Good." Because if Richard knew and came anyway, that meant he was arrogant. And arrogance was a weakness Jack could exploit, a crack in the armor, a vulnerability that could be leveraged into defeat. He lay down on his bed, still dressed, the Glock within reach, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in Sacramento, Sophie was sleeping safely, dreaming whatever 14-year-olds dreamed, unaware that her father was about to walk into the most dangerous situation of his life. Jack thought about Margaret's note. The tiger protects its treasure. But the note had never said what the treasure was. Not the money, not the gold. Something else, something more important, something worth dying for. Family, legacy, honor. The intangible things that made life worth living, that separated humans from animals, civilization from chaos. Richard had lost sight of that, had traded his humanity for wealth, his family for power, his soul for gold that would ultimately mean nothing, by nothing that mattered, leave him alone and empty and defeated even in victory. Jack would not make that mistake, would not sacrifice Sophie for money, would not trade his integrity for security, would not become what Richard had become. Tomorrow they would face each other. Tomorrow the game would end, one way or another. And Jack would make sure that when it was over, when the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted, Sophie would still have a father worth coming home to. A father who protected his treasure. Not with money, not with gold, but with everything he had, everything he was, everything he was willing to lose to keep her safe. The tiger was wounded, cornered, outnumbered, but still dangerous, still deadly, still fighting. The warehouse in Dogpatch sat at the edge of the bay, a forgotten relic from when San Francisco had been a working port instead of a tech playground. Concrete and rust, broken windows and graffiti, the kind of place where deals went bad and bodies disappeared into the water without anyone asking questions. Jack arrived 2 hours early, while the sun was still setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. Marcus Webb was already there with 3 other Marines, all of them in civilian clothes but moving with that particular efficiency that marked military training. They had set up overwatch positions on the roof of an adjacent building, rifles with scopes, radios with encrypted channels, every angle covered. Marcus helped Jack into the wire, a sophisticated piece of equipment that Vanessa had acquired through her hedge fund contacts, the kind intelligence agencies used, nearly impossible to detect even with a professional sweep. This transmits to a recorder in the van, Marcus explained, taping the microphone to Jack's chest. We'll have audio and video. Everything Richard says, everything he admits, it's all evidence. And if things go wrong, Marcus met his eyes. Then we extract you, by force if necessary. You don't die here, Jack. That's not how this ends. Roger that. Jack checked his Glock one more time, confirmed the magazine was full, the chamber loaded. He wore it in a shoulder holster beneath his jacket, accessible but concealed. Richard would expect him to be armed, would probably be armed himself or have people who were. Dylan arrived as the last light was fading, driving Vanessa's Mercedes, expensive and anonymous, the kind of car that belonged in this neighborhood as much as a tuxedo at a homeless shelter. He parked near the warehouse entrance, killed the engine, sat there for a moment gathering himself. Jack walked over, leaned down to the window Dylan had rolled down. You okay? 12 hours sober, feels like 12 years. Dylan's hands were steady on the wheel, but his eyes were fever bright, the look of a man running on will alone. But I'm here, I'm functional, I can do this. You don't have to. Marcus and his guys can handle security. This isn't about security, this is about family, about standing up when it matters. Dylan looked at Jack with something that might have been respect or might have been desperation. My whole life I've been running from things, from responsibility, from consequences, from myself. Not tonight. Tonight I stand. Jack nodded, understanding, accepting. Some battles you had to fight even when the odds were bad, even when survival was not guaranteed. Not because you would win, because refusing to fight meant losing something more important than life. Vanessa was the last to arrive, pulling up in a rental car, nondescript and practical. She had a laptop bag over her shoulder, a phone in her hand, looking more like a business executive heading to a meeting than a woman walking into a potential war zone. Richard's on his way, she said. His security detail swept the building an hour ago, found nothing. He thinks he's in control. Good, let him think that. They went inside together, through a loading dock door that screeched on rusted hinges. The interior was vast and empty, 50,000 square feet of concrete floor and steel support columns, skylights broken and letting in the last of the daylight. Their footsteps echoed, lonely and hollow. In the center of the space, Vanessa had arranged a table and chairs, the kind of staging that suggested negotiation, civilized discussion. But everyone knew what this really was: a confrontation, a reckoning, an ending. Jack sat facing the entrance. Vanessa stood behind him, her laptop open, ready to display evidence. Dylan took position to the side, visible but not threatening, a witness more than a participant. They waited. 20 minutes later, headlights swept through the broken windows. Multiple vehicles, SUVs pulling up in formation, professional and coordinated. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps approached. Richard walked in, flanked by 4 men, all of them armed, all of them scanning the space with the practiced caution of security contractors who had worked hostile environments. Richard himself wore a suit that probably cost $5,000, looking like he had just come from a board meeting, casual and confident, and completely in control. He stopped 20 feet from the table, smiled. Hello, little brother, nice place. Very atmospheric, very you. Sit down, Richard. I don't think so. I'm comfortable standing. Besides, this won't take long. He gestured to one of his men who stepped forward with a briefcase, set it on the table, opened it. Inside were documents, contracts, legal papers, all of them official looking, all of them bearing government seals and signatures. These are purchase agreements, Richard explained. For the gold currently in FBI custody, I've negotiated a deal with the federal government. They keep 40% as taxes and fees. I keep 60% as the legal inheritor of Victor Lynn's estate. All completely above board, all completely legal. Jack looked at the papers, saw Agent Cole's signature at the bottom, saw the FBI seal, saw the careful language that turned theft into legitimate transaction. How much did you pay Cole to make this happen? Does it matter? The point is I won. The gold is mine, legally, officially mine, and there's nothing you can do about it. What about Victor? Jack asked quietly. What about the fact that you killed him to get this? Richard's smile never wavered. Victor died of a heart attack, tragic but natural. The medical records are clear. Records you paid Dr. Zhao to falsify. Prove it. Zhao's been dead for 3 years. Heart attack, ironically. And even if you could prove I paid him, so what? Paying a doctor doesn't make you a murderer. It makes you a cautious man covering his bases. Vanessa stepped forward, her laptop turned to show the screen. What about this? She played the video, Margaret's study. Richard searching the cabinet, Margaret confronting him. Richard grabbing her, threatening her, his face twisted with rage. Richard watched without expression. When it ended, he shrugged. So I had an argument with an old woman. So I got frustrated looking for something that belonged to my family. That's not a crime, Vanessa. That's not even particularly interesting. You assaulted her. I touched her arm, barely, she was fine, and now she's dead so she can't testify otherwise. He looked at Jack. Is this your big play, a video of me having a bad day? That's what you're betting everything on. Jack stood up slowly, his hand moving to the Glock, not drawing it but making the threat clear. I'm betting on the fact that you're a killer, that you murdered Victor for gold you couldn't find, that you terrorized Margaret until she died, that you threatened my daughter, crossed every line, burned every bridge, destroyed everything good in this family for money you'll never even enjoy. Never enjoy, Richard laughed. Jack, I'm going to enjoy every cent. I'm going to buy things you can't imagine, go places you'll never see, live a life you'll never understand, and I'm going to do it all knowing that I beat you, that I was smarter, faster, better. That's the real treasure, little brother, not the gold, the winning. Is that what you told yourself when you killed Victor? Richard's smile faded, just slightly, the mask slipping for half a second before snapping back into place. I didn't kill Victor. Yes, you did, and you're going to admit it, right here, right now, because that's what narcissists do. They can't help but brag, can't help but rub it in, can't help but need everyone to know how clever they were. I'm not admitting anything. Then tell me why Victor died. Tell me why a healthy 49-year-old man with no history of heart disease suddenly dropped dead the same week he refused to tell you where the gold was hidden. Richard's jaw tightened. Behind him, his security contractors shifted weight, hands moving toward weapons, tension rising like pressure in a sealed container. You don't know what you're talking about. I know Victor worked for the CIA. I know he was funneling money to Operation Yellow Bird, helping refugees escape China. I know he accumulated $100 million in gold doing it. And I know you found out, demanded he tell you where it was, and when he refused, you killed him. You can't prove any of that. I don't need to prove it to a court. I just need you to admit it, to say it out loud, to own what you are." For a long moment Richard just stared at Jack, something ugly moving behind his eyes. Then he laughed, but it was not the confident laugh from before. This was sharp, bitter, the sound of a man who had gone so far into darkness he could not find his way back. "You want to know what happened? Fine. I'll tell you. Victor was weak. He had a fortune and he was going to give it away to strangers, to people who meant nothing, who contributed nothing. He was going to waste it on ideology, on saving people who didn't deserve saving, and I couldn't let that happen. So you killed him." "I gave him a choice. Tell me where the gold was or die. He chose death. That was his decision, not mine." Jack felt ice spread through his chest, heard the words, heard the confession, knew the wire was recording every syllable. "How did you do it?" "Potassium chloride, injected directly into his bloodstream while he slept. Stops the heart instantly. Looks exactly like a heart attack. Completely undetectable if the coroner doesn't know to look for it. Which he didn't because I paid him not to." Vanessa's breath caught. Even knowing the truth, hearing Richard say it out loud was something else, a revelation of depths that could not be taken back. "And Margaret," Jack asked, "did you kill her too?" "No, I didn't need to. She was old, frail. The stress did it for me. But I would have, if necessary, just like I'll kill you if you don't walk away right now." Richard pulled a gun from beneath his jacket, a compact pistol that appeared in his hand like magic. His security contractors did the same. 4 weapons suddenly pointed at Jack, at Vanessa, at Dylan. "Here's what's going to happen," Richard said, his voice cold and precise. "You're going to give me that wire you're wearing. You're going to hand over any recordings, any evidence, anything you think you have. And then you're going to leave San Francisco, tonight, forever. If I ever see you again, if I ever hear your name, if you ever try to contact Sophie, I will end you. Do you understand?" Jack's hand was on his Glock, thumb on the safety, but the math was bad. 1 against 5, all of them trained, all of them ready. Dylan was armed but shaking, unreliable. Vanessa was defenseless. If shooting started, people would die, and Jack could not guarantee it would be the right people. Then Dylan moved. Not toward Richard, toward the light. He stepped into the center of the warehouse, into the shaft of moonlight coming through the broken skylight, and when he spoke, his voice was different, stronger, clearer, the voice of a man who had found something he thought he had lost forever. "You really don't recognize me, do you, Richard?" Richard's gun swung toward Dylan, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you talking about?" 1987. The kidnapping. The little boy who was taken from Margaret and Victor's backyard. The ransom that was paid. The body that was never found. Understanding dawned slowly, like sunrise, terrible and inevitable. "No, you're not. You can't be." "My name was Daniel Lynn. I was 3 years old when Frank Morrison took me, when you paid him to take me, when you thought killing a child would break Victor's will and make him tell you where the gold was." Richard's face went white. "Daniel died. They found his clothes by the river." "They found clothes, not a body, because Frank didn't kill me. He couldn't. So he sold me to a family in Arizona, the Carters, and they raised me as their son, Dylan Carter. But I always knew something was wrong, always felt like I didn't belong. And when they died, when I found out the truth, I started looking for answers." Dylan pulled something from his pocket. A photograph, old and faded. A little boy with dark hair and darker eyes, standing between Margaret and Victor, all 3 of them smiling. This was in Margaret's study. She kept it on her desk for 35 years. When I found her, when I showed her this picture and asked if she knew who I was, she cried for 3 days straight. Then she had me tested. DNA test. proved beyond any doubt that I'm her son, that I'm Victor's son, that I'm the child you tried to murder." He pulled up his sleeve, showed his inner forearm. There was a birthmark distinctive, shaped like a crescent moon. "Victor had the same mark," Dylan said quietly. "Right arm, inner forearm. Genetic, passed from father to son. You've seen pictures. You know I'm not lying. I'm 40 years old, Richard. Exactly the age Daniel Lynn would be if he had lived." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Jack stared at Dylan, seeing him differently now, seeing the resemblance to the old photographs, seeing what Margaret must have seen, the ghost of a lost child returned. "She left me money in the will," Dylan continued, "but not the gold, because she knew you'd be watching, knew you'd be suspicious if I got too much. So she gave it to Jack instead, gave him the clues, the map, the combination, trusting that he'd figure it out, that he'd find me, that together we'd stop you." Richard's gun hand was shaking now, his control slipping. "You're lying. This is some kind of con, some scheme you and Jack cooked up." "Then explain the birthmark. Explain why I look exactly like Victor did at 40. Explain why Margaret left everything set up this way." Richard's gun came up, aimed directly at Dylan's chest. "Then I'll finish what I started. I tried to kill you once. This time I won't fail." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, echoing off concrete and steel. But it was not Richard who fired. It was Agent Sarah Nguyen, stepping out of the shadows with her service weapon drawn, FBI tactical team flooding in behind her. A dozen agents in body armor moving with practiced efficiency. "FBI, drop your weapons now." Richard's contractors hesitated, calculating, seeing the odds shift decisively against them. One by one they lowered their guns, raised their hands. Richard stood frozen, his pistol still pointed at Dylan, his face twisted with rage and fear and the terrible knowledge that he had lost. "Drop it, Mr. Chen," Nguyen said, her voice calm but absolute. "It's over." Richard's finger tightened on the trigger. Jack saw it happening, saw the decision being made, the final desperate play of a man with nothing left to lose. Jack drew and fired in one smooth motion, muscle memory from 10,000 hours of training. The shot took Richard in the shoulder, spinning him, the gun flying from his hand to clatter across the concrete floor. Richard fell, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He looked up at Jack with something that might have been hatred or might have been recognition, seeing finally what he had never understood before. That Jack was not weak, was not beaten, was not the failure Richard had always believed him to be. "You're under arrest," Nguyen said, crouching next to Richard. "For the murder of Victor Lynn, for conspiracy to commit murder, for assault, for fraud, for everything we just recorded." She pulled out handcuffs, secured Richard's wrists behind his back while he writhed and cursed and promised lawyers and consequences that would never come. Marcus Webb appeared from the shadows, his rifle slung, his team spreading out to secure the perimeter. He nodded at Jack, a simple acknowledgement between warriors. Mission accomplished. Vanessa sat down hard, the adrenaline draining out of her, leaving her pale and shaking. Jack went to her, helped her up, held her while she cried, all the fear and guilt and relief pouring out in sobs she had been holding back for months. Dylan stood in the moonlight, looking down at Richard being dragged away by FBI agents, watching the brother who had tried to kill him disappear into custody, into a future measured in decades behind bars. "I should feel something," Dylan said. "Satisfaction, revenge, something, but I just feel empty." "That's because you're free," Jack told him. "For the first time in your life, you're free of him, free of the fear, free of the lies. That emptiness is just space for something better." Agent Nguyen approached, holstering her weapon. We've been investigating Richard for 6 months, suspected his connection to organized crime, money laundering, but we could never prove anything. Then Vanessa contacted us 3 days ago, gave us everything she had. Evidence, recordings, witness testimony. Enough to get warrants to set this up to catch him in the act. You knew we were coming here, Jack said. We knew, but we needed Richard to confess, needed him to incriminate himself on record. Vanessa said you could make that happen. She was right. Nguyen looked at Dylan, her expression softening slightly. I'm sorry for what happened to you, Mr. Lin. What you've been through, what your family went through. We'll make sure Richard pays for all of it. She paused, pulled out another set of handcuffs. Agent Marcus Cole has also been arrested. He was taken into custody 2 hours ago on charges of corruption, accepting bribes and obstruction of justice. He'll face federal prosecution alongside your brother. Jack felt something release in his chest. Justice, finally, for all of it. The gold, Nguyen continued. It's federal property, part of an intelligence operation from 1989. But the CIA has agreed to release 60% of it to Victor Lin's legal heirs, once we confirm the provenance and complete the investigation. After taxes, that's approximately $60 million. She looked at Dylan, then at Jack. As Victor's biological son, Mr. Lin, you're the primary heir, but I understand Mrs. Chen's will left specific instructions about how these funds should be used. 3 weeks later, Jack stood in Margaret's house, the Victorian mansion on Russian Hill that had been locked up since her death, preserved like a museum while the estate was settled. But now the paperwork was complete, the lawyers satisfied, the inheritance distributed. The house belonged to Daniel now. Along with a substantial portion of the estate, the money Margaret had kept in trust for the son she thought she had lost, the inheritance she had protected through carefully worded legal documents that only activated when Daniel's identity was confirmed beyond doubt. Sophie was there, home from Sacramento, standing in the study looking at the space where the jade tiger cabinet had once dominated the room. The cabinet was back now, returned from Richard's storage unit, restored to its proper place. Can we keep it? Sophie asked. It's not ours anymore, Jack said. It belongs to Daniel, this whole house does. Actually, Daniel said, walking in with papers in his hand, I've been thinking about that. The house is too big for one person, too full of memories. I thought maybe we could turn it into something else, something useful. He handed the papers to Jack. A proposal, detailed and thoughtful, for converting the house into a community center, a place for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. Counseling, job training, support groups. The Victor Lin and Margaret Chen Center for Veteran Services. We'd need someone to run it, Daniel said. Someone who understands what veterans need, what they've been through, someone they'd respect. Jack read through the proposal, seeing the vision, the careful planning, the way Daniel had thought through every detail. This would take money, a lot of money. We have money, $60 million after taxes, after the FBI took their cut of the gold, more than enough to run this place for decades. Daniel smiled, the first real smile Jack had seen on his face. Besides, this is what Victor wanted, what Margaret wanted, to help people to build something meaningful, not to hoard wealth but to use it. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, looking healthier than she had in months, the fear gone from her eyes. I'm in, she said. I'll handle the finances, the administration. After what I did, after the mistakes I made, this is my chance to make it right, to be part of something good. Jack looked around the study, at the three of them, family bound not by blood alone, but by shared trauma and shared purpose. People who had been broken and were choosing to build something from the pieces. What about Richard? Sophie asked quietly. Trial concluded last week, Vanessa said. He was convicted on all counts. Murder of Victor Lin, conspiracy, assault, fraud, corruption. The judge gave him life in prison without possibility of parole. Good, Sophie said, with a finality that made Jack proud. The jade tiger cabinet stood against the wall, its 5 tigers frozen in their eternal hunt, carved into wood that had survived centuries. Jack ran his hand over the surface, feeling the craftsmanship, the care, the love that had gone into creating something meant to last. Margaret had known what she was doing. Every piece of the puzzle, every clue, every choice had been deliberate. She had given Jack the cabinet not because it was valuable, but because she knew he would look at it the way a craftsman looked at things. Would see the details, would notice the inconsistencies, would find the hidden compartments. She had given him the $420,000 because she knew he was drowning, knew he needed help but would never ask for it, knew that Sophie deserved better. That money, separate from the $500,000 inheritance in the bank, had been Margaret's way of giving Jack options, security, a bridge to something better. And she had left clues that led to Daniel because she wanted her lost son found, wanted her family restored, wanted the truth to finally emerge from decades of lies and secrets. The tiger protects its treasure. The treasure had never been the gold. It had been family, truth, justice. The things that lasted longer than money, meant more than wealth, defined what it meant to be human. 6 months after Richard's conviction, the Victor Lin and Margaret Chen Center for Veteran Services opened its doors. The mansion had been renovated but carefully, preserving the character while adding modern amenities. Counseling rooms, job training facilities, a library, a gym, sleeping quarters for veterans in crisis who needed a safe place to land. Jack ran the center, working 14-hour days, finding purpose in helping men and women who reminded him of himself. Warriors trying to find their way in a world that did not understand them, did not value what they had sacrificed, did not see them as anything more than problems to be managed. Daniel worked beside him, clean and sober for 6 months, finding his own redemption in service, in showing up every day, in being the person Margaret had believed he could become. Vanessa managed the finances, the fundraising, the careful stewardship of resources that would keep the center running for generations. She had pleaded guilty to embezzlement, served 6 months in minimum security, came out with a record but also with purpose, with a mission that made the mistakes of her past feel less like endings and more like lessons. Sophie visited on weekends, volunteering, helping veterans fill out paperwork, listening to their stories with the patience and compassion of someone who understood what it meant to struggle, to fight, to survive. On the anniversary of Margaret's death, they gathered in the study, the 4 of them, standing before the jade tiger cabinet that had started everything. Jack opened the hidden compartment, the one he had shown Daniel and Vanessa but never emptied completely. Inside was one last package, one final gift Margaret had left. He opened it carefully. Inside were letters, one for each of them, written in Margaret's elegant script. Jack's letter was short. My dear Jackson, if you are reading this, you have found Daniel. You have stopped Richard. You have protected your treasure. I always knew you would. You are stronger than you believe, more capable than you know. Victor would have been proud of you. I am proud of you. Use this gift wisely. Build something that lasts. And remember that family is not who you are born to, but who you choose to stand beside. With all my love, Margaret. Jack folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the cabinet. Outside, the sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky in colors that reminded him of fire and blood, and the 1,000 sunsets he had watched in Iraq, wondering if he would survive to see another one. He had survived, more than survived. He had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting, something that would outlast him and continue long after he was gone. The center would help thousands of veterans, would save lives, restore hope, provide the support that the government promised but rarely delivered. It would be Margaret's legacy and Victor's redemption and Richard's opposite. Everything he had tried to destroy transformed into something beautiful and necessary and good. Sophie came to stand beside Jack, took his hand. "Are you happy, Dad?" He thought about the question. Happiness was complicated, especially for men who had seen what he had seen, done what he had done. But standing here in this house with this family doing this work, he felt something close to it. "Yeah, kiddo, I am." She smiled, squeezed his hand, and together they walked downstairs, toward the common room where veterans were gathering for dinner, toward the future they were building one day at a time, toward the life Margaret had given them with her careful planning and her faith and her love. The tiger had protected its treasure, and the treasure had multiplied, had grown, had become something greater than gold or money or anything that could be counted in dollars. It had become purpose, family, legacy. It had become enough. Outside, night fell over San Francisco. Inside the center, lights burned bright, warm against the darkness, a beacon for those who needed it, a promise that they were not alone, not forgotten, not beyond help. And in the study on the second floor, the jade tiger cabinet stood silent and eternal, its 5 tigers still hunting, still protecting, still watching over the family it had helped create, the legacy it had helped preserve, the truth it had helped reveal. Margaret was gone. Victor was gone. Richard was locked away, his life measured in decades of concrete and steel and regret. But the rest of them remained, choosing family over fortune, choosing service over self, choosing to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of hurt, to stand together when everything pushed them apart. The tiger's treasure, finally safe, finally home, finally whole.